Hey, today I'll show you how to make a fougasse. This French bread is quite similar to the Italian focaccia. The biggest difference is that it has more of a crust to crumb ratio. And what I mean by that is that it has quite a lot of crust in relation to the soft inside part. So if you love your crusty bread, this is one for you. So keep watching and I'll show you how to make it. You will only need a few pieces of basic equipment to make this. A baking tray, digital scales, bowl to mix everything in, the dough scraper and digital probe is all you need. So now to the ingredients. To make this fougasse, we'll use something called old dough, which consists of flour, water, yeast and salt, just like a regular bread. Now normally what a baker would do is make a dough the day before, and before shaping it or before proofing it, you would take a piece and leave it for the next bake. This is mainly for flavor. Now we only need 1/10 of a gram of yeast for this recipe, so what I'm doing here is weighing out 1 gram on my scales and dividing it into 10 equal pieces. Although it may look like I'm doing something highly illegal here, but my scales only weigh in whole grams, so that's my only option. Now for the main dough, we'll need more flour, white flour in this case, wholemeal flour, water, salt, more yeast and some olive oil, and also some chopped olives to fold through the dough later on. We'll need a bit of extra olive oil and some sea salt to top the dough before baking. This is not totally necessary, but we'll give it a nice shiny crust. Right, so now we're ready to start. Now I know my kitchen is around 22 degrees Celsius, so I want my water to be around the same temperature. You want to make the old dough around 12 to 16 hours ahead of time. There's no special methods here, just mix your water, yeast, salt and flour, cover it and leave it out until it's ready. A fougasse can be made with various different doughs. It doesn't have to be this exact recipe. You can also use different pre-ferments like Polish or Bega, and if you want to see more videos about those, you can click the link up in the right corner. Now once you've added all the ingredients, give them a good mix. You don't have to work the dough, just mix it around until there's no dry flour left. I like to place it in a little glass container or in a jar, just to see how much it rises up. If it's really warm in your kitchen, place it in a cooler corner, maybe inside a cupboard somewhere. But I just left it out on the table. And a good way of knowing that it's ready is that it will rise up and will start collapsing back in on itself. So that looks ready now. You can see it's collapsed back into the center, and now we can use it to make our main dough. So get your mixing bowl, get your water, make sure it's the right temperature. As always, add your yeast first and let it hydrate a little bit. A couple minutes later you can add your salt and give it a good mix to dissolve all the flakes. If using sea salt, I would recommend it, because table salt is normally full of anti-caking agents, which are horrible chemicals that will kill your yeast. Now we can add the pre-ferment, or the old dough, and contrary to what I would normally do, I'll add the olive oil straight at the beginning. See how that works out. Normally this would make it harder to develop gluten, but we'll give it a try. Now to the last two ingredients, the wholemeal flour and the white flour. Now get your hands dirty, give it a good mix, make sure there's no dry lumps of flour left. Before you start kneading it, what I sometimes like to do is just to leave the dough for 5 minutes to sit. It will hydrate the flour and it will make it easier to develop the gluten without you putting any effort into it. Because this dough is quite sticky, we'll use the stretch and fold method to knead it. Make sure your hands are wet with water. You don't want them dripping, but just cover them with water so the dough doesn't stick to them. This will make it much easier for you. Right, to do the stretch and fold, you want to pick the dough up, put it on the table, and using the stickiness of it, pull it towards yourself to stretch it and fold it over. When you're doing this, you want to pick the dough up from one side, not from the front. If it starts sticking, just let it relax for a minute, scrape it all together, wet your hands again and keep going. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this will take some effort. You're gonna have to do this around 400 times. But it shouldn't take you longer than 10 minutes all in all. You can see that the dough has developed nicely already. This is after 200 times, so 5 minutes. So just pop a can of elbow grease and keep going. So it's been around 10 minutes. I can feel the dough becoming nice and stretchy. And if I pick it up and handle it, I can see that it doesn't stick to my hands anymore as much as it did before. And it's nice and elastic. And definitely a lot smoother as well. So now just organize it in a nice neat ball and we'll be ready to proof it. We'll proof the dough for 1.5 hours, and every half an hour we'll give it a fold. But more on that in a minute. What I suggest you do after you finish kneading your dough is take the temperature of it. If it's too high or too low, you want to let it proof in a warmer or cooler part of your kitchen, or you want to let it proof for longer. But measuring the temperature is what gives you the control over that. But this looks about right, so I'll let it proof for 30 minutes and then I'll give it its first fold. And if you noticed, we didn't add the olives yet. They'll come now. Folding them into the dough is a lot easier and less messy to do, so that's why we do it this way. Now to fold the dough, first get your olives, and then make sure you wet your hands, otherwise they might stick to the dough. You don't want them dripping, just wet so the dough doesn't stick. And to fold it, you want to pick up a piece and fold it over the center, and go around in a circle until you reach the point where you started. And after you've finished, you want to pick the dough up and place it seam side down so it doesn't open up again and we have a smooth surface. And now we'll cover it up again and let it proof for another 30 minutes. So after the first fold, you should see a definite increase in volume whilst it's proofing. So 30 minutes later, ready for the second fold. Make sure to wet your hands again so they don't stick, and handle the dough quite gently because it's proofing nicely, there's loads of gas inside, you don't want to knock it out. And this time you want to flip the dough upside down before you start because you want to keep that side smooth. And just as before, take a corner and fold it over the middle, going around in a circle until you reach the point where you started, and then flip it back smooth side up again, ready for its next half an hour proofing. What the folds do, besides just working in the olives into the dough, they also create extra gluten structure because you are creating more layers in the dough. And you are equalizing the temperature of the dough. It might be too warm in the middle and too cool on the outside, or the other way around. So after the second fold, we can preheat our oven to 230 degrees Celsius, no fan, or 210 with fan if you can't switch it off. The dough is puffing up really well at this point, and that's a good sign. Now we are ready to pre-shape it. Get your non-stick tray and oil it up. If you want, you can be quite generous with the oil because the bread will soak it up as it's baking. I like it quite oily, so I just went for it. Spread it all around and then using your oily hand, pick the dough out of the bowl. Just release it gently from the sides of the bowl, you don't want to press out too much gas, and place it on your tray. Now to pre-shape it, you just want to gently press it out with your fingertips to fit the size of your tray. You want it about 1 inch thick. Now normally Fougasse will be shaped in kind of a triangle shape, but I realized my tray was a bit too small for the size of dough, so I just went for kind of an oblong one. Which is no big deal. I mean, it's gonna taste great, that's all I care about. I don't care about triangles or squares or whatever. Flavor and texture is what we're going for, that's the most important part. Now cover it and leave it to proof for another 30 minutes. Not only will the dough rise a bit more, the gluten will also relax and it will be easier to shape it later on. So 30 minutes later, we are ready for the final shaping. At this point, I mean you don't have to, but I like to drizzle it with olive oil. Gives it that nice crust, just like a focaccia. Spread it around using your hands, and then using the fingertips, just press the dough out a little bit more to fit the shape of the pan, so it's not too thick. And then using your dough scraper, which is always an essential tool for bread baking, this time it comes in handy to make the pattern of the classic Fougasse. You want to cut it to resemble a leaf. So just give it a couple of cuts in the middle and a few diagonal cuts along the sides, and then stretch it out. And again, my tray was a little bit too small for this recipe. I would have liked to stretch it out a little bit more so the holes are bigger for visual purposes really, but it was fine anyway. Those cuts are what give the fougasse the extra crust, because we are creating more surface area. Yeah, so just give it a stretch, one last sprinkling of sea salt, and in the oven it goes. This bread doesn't take long to bake, around 20 minutes. But what you want to be careful of is that the bottom cooks properly. Normally, in a bakery, this would be baked on a solid stone surface and that will heat it from the bottom, but because we're using a normal home oven, it might not do. So after the initial 20-minute bake, I would suggest checking the bottom for doneness. Needless to say, you want to be quite gentle here. And as we flipped it over, we can see that the bottom is not quite done, but that's fine. Just stick it back in the oven for 5 more minutes, and it will crisp up and will be perfectly baked. And that's it, it's ready. Beautifully crisp all over, and to preserve this crispy crust, you want to cool it down on a cooling rack. But if you don't have a cooling rack, that's fine. Just lean your bread against something. You don't want it touching a solid surface, because then it will sweat and will get soggy. And that's the fougasse. For me, it's just perfect by itself. I mean, it's loaded with olives and olive oil, but because there's no such thing as too much olive oil, you can always cut yourself a piece off and dip it in some more. And as always, if you got any questions or suggestions, write them down in comments. And if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe, because I'll be posting every Wednesday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Wait, I couldn't resist. I just have to show you a little bit more of this bread. Look at this fluffy goodness. It's amazing. Nothing beats bread that you made with your own 2 hands.